Chapter 7. The Valley of Water. The following morning, Kondima wakened early. "Will I go to Singapore today?" she asked Sandoli. "The boat is down there at the wharf." Sandoli laughed at her eager excitement. "You will not get on it till this evening, though, so you needn't have wakened so early." Kondima could sleep no more. She must run with Sandoli to the crown of the hill on which the Tuan's house stood. Directly below, in the bright blue water, lay the ship. Kondima, never having seen a ship before, thought it large and elegant beyond description. A blue funnel stood up from the ship's deck, and tiny figures seemed to be climbing its ladders. Oh, what would Mookit say? He has never seen a ship. Can it go over the valley of water by itself? Doesn't anything pull it? Sandoli laughed aloud at the funny questions Kondima asked. "You just wait and see. By this time tomorrow you will know all about ships." They walked back to the big house, hand in hand. Once taught in the wonders of the busy city life, Kondima accepted everything. Nothing surprised her. Nothing frightened her. Nothing seemed impossible. At 6 o'clock, when the red bus came to carry the luggage and passengers down to the wharf, she scrambled into the front seat with little Aline and the guru without the slightest hesitation. At the wharf, the ship seemed to have grown to gigantic size. It must be almost as big as the world. A trip to the moon or the stars could not be more fabulous, and such a trip would have surprised her none at all. Kondima kept her eye on the little traveling case where Auntie had packed the bright pillow, the rosebud pajamas, and all of her other finery. The Tuan had arranged that Kondima should share a cabin with an older Dotson girl named Gar, who must also go to Singapore for medicine. Gar could speak Kondima's language, and the girls became friends at sight. The Tuan unpacked Kondima's pillow and blanket. After some words of encouragement and a prayer for the safety and healing of both girls, he said goodbye and left them to his brother's care. "Goodbye, goodbye," the words floated back as the ship cast off her cables and put out into the valley of water. "Look, Kondima, Tuan has taken off his hat. See, he is waving it high over his head." Sure enough, the familiar figure in the khaki suit stood waving his white sun helmet until the ship turned and passed behind an island. When it came out to the far side, the girls could not see anything on the wharf clearly. Now the guru, or uncle, as Kondima soon learned to call him, came to say that the little ones had better get settled, because the sea looked like it would get a bit rough. He guided the two girls to their cabin. "I will see that you get a good supper," he promised as he left them. No one had told Kondima about seasickness. "I don't want any supper," she mumbled when Uncle and the steward came in the door. The Chinese steward set a tray of food before her. "My head is whirling around and around. I want to go back to the Tuan's house. I don't like the valley of water." Uncle smiled at her and patted her hand. "You will get your sea legs in a day or two, and then you will feel good as new." Kondima didn't think she would ever feel good again. She complained to her friend Gar, and the older girl tried to comfort her, but Gar looked as sick as Kondima did. She cried a few tears into the new pillow. Then Kondima remembered Sandoli and how she looked kneeling with her lovely face lifted. She remembered the group of happy children singing in the big house and their prayers at bedtime. She remembered the story of little Ellen, whose face was spoiled by a stone. She lay quiet for a long time until she thought that Gar must be asleep. Then Kondima slipped to her knees beside her berth and talked to her friend Jesus. All at once she knew that Jesus had come along with her into this boat and into this cabin. Comforted and quieted, she snuggled under her red blanket and slept. Sometime in the night, Kondima woke. For a moment she couldn't think where she could be, not in the little hut on the mountainside, nor in Sandola's house. With a start she realized that she was in her bunk on the great, beautiful ship on her way to Singapore. The great, beautiful ship must be in trouble. Kondima felt herself going down, down, sinking into the valley. Then she felt herself tossed up high. She seemed to be standing on her head. Then her feet hit the board at the foot of her berth, and she rose again. The great, beautiful ship smelled awful. Dank, moldy odors pushed through the partly open door. Uncle had latched it partly open. Feeble light shone in from the passage outside. Oh, what a miserable feeling! She braced herself with both hands and both feet as the good ship plunged and corkscrewed in the rough water. She looked up at the small round window directly above her berth. She saw that someone had screwed it tight shut, but the thick glass made a little round place that she might be able to see through. Kondima got up. She hung on to the heavy screw of the window with one hand and braced herself with the other. She looked out. The moon shone overhead. 1,000 stars twinkled out of the night, but they didn't seem important. The surface of the sea rolled in a tumbled series of hills and valleys, and they changed every minute. The ship must climb over the hills, then swoop down into the valleys between. Sometimes a hill of water exploded and dashed white spray against Kondima's window with a loud slap. At first Kondima drew back in fear from those splashes of water, but seeing that not a drop could come through the tightly closed porthole, she grew bold and laid her face against the cool glass. The moist dampness comforted her hot cheek. The ship she had thought so big when she climbed aboard now seemed but a tiny thing in the midst of those boundless wastes of water. How could it ever be found again? What could keep it from being lost in all those hills and valleys? No one could see the way. Could anyone be awake on the ship? Kondima slipped out of her berth. She unlatched the cabin door and latched it again after her. A strong rail extended the whole length of the passageway outside. She held on to it to steady herself on the dizzy journey. She came to a stairway and climbed it to the upper deck. She had stood right there last night when Tuan had waved goodbye from the wharf. No one seemed to be awake here. She walked clear to the other end, hanging on to the rail that ran around the ship's deck. Then she saw another stairway, a narrower one, almost like the ladder in front of the houses of the Durian village. The ladder led up and up. That was the direction she wanted to go, up and out of this tumbling confusion, this endless water that had no edge and no end. She scrambled up the ladder like a jungle monkey. She came out on a small deck, and in the middle of it stood a room with glass walls. She could see right through them. A gray-haired man inside bent over some papers spread on a table. At the front of the glass room, another man stood behind a giant wheel, and every time the ship started to climb one of those hills of water, he turned the wheel just a little. Kondima stood for a moment, quietly watching the two men. "Those are the drivers of the ship," she told herself. "They do not sleep." She saw the gray-haired man smile, and he looked at his papers. The drivers are not afraid. She found the thought comforting. They are not lost. Feeling much safer, she turned and crawled down the ladder. Her naked feet had just touched the deck when two strong arms grabbed her. "What is the child doing climbing about the ship in the middle of the night?" At sound of the pleasant voice, she turned and looked into the face of a jolly sailor. He cried out in fright and set her quietly down. She stood bewildered and still for a moment. The sailor had disappeared. She found the stairs, returned to her cabin, let herself through the latched door, and snuggled under the red blanket. She knew now that the drivers of the great ship did not sleep. They knew their way through the valley of the water. Kondima wakened later. A steward stood by her berth with a tray. Uncle had come with him. "How is my little mountain girl this morning?" Uncle asked in a cheerful voice. "We are sailing in smoother water. You will feel much better today." Kondima sat up, looked at the rice gruel and the good-smelling fish, tasted it, and then finished everything on her tray. She saw that Gar felt better too. Uncle left them, and the two girls looked out through the round window. The sea had calmed. Only a ruffle of tiny waves disturbed the water, and the ship plowed through them without rising or falling. To the left, Kondima could see the mountains of Borneo standing purple against the gray sky. Uncle came back after an hour. He laid a large picture book in Kondima's lap. "This will amuse you, little one." He opened the book and pointed to pictures of strange houses, and people, and flowers, and trees, and animals, such as neither of the girls had ever seen. They spent hours looking at the pictures and wondering about them. "This animal must be a water buffalo," Kondima pointed at a picture. "But his nose drags almost to the ground, and his ears are too big." "No, it can't be a water buffalo." Gar studied the creature. "I have heard my father tell of such an animal. Men use it for riding and for lifting heavy logs. Sometimes people build little houses on the animal's back and decorate them with beautiful cloth. I think only rich people and rajas ride on such animals." "I would like to see one." Kondima clasped her hands with joy. "Maybe I will see one in Singapore." She closed the book and put it carefully in the little hammock over her berth. Her eyes felt tired and sore from looking at the pictures so long. When evening came again, the sea lay calm as a lake. Uncle stuck his head in the cabin door after both girls had rolled up in their blankets for the night. "Are we halfway to Singapore, Uncle?" Kondima asked. "No, child. We are going to spend the day tomorrow loading water buffalo at Labuan. I think you will like to see that." At midnight, Kondima roused from deep sleep and sensed a great stillness. The engine's throb had ceased. In the silence, she heard the noise of heavy chains running through iron. Then nothing but quiet. At dawn, the girls wakened to the sound of busy activity all over the ship. They pressed their faces against the porthole. Kondima could see a town set back from the water. Right below the ship, a wharf of heavy planks showed big iron knobs set along its edge. Huge loops of heavy cable had been fastened around the knobs, and the ship seemed to pull on them and draw nearer to the wharf. Kondima put on her new blue dress and went with Gar to the upper deck where they could watch the loading. Already the wharf swarmed with pushing, shouting coolies. Piles of rubber and bales of merchandise lay all over the wharf. Noise of machinery came from the front of the ship. A long metal arm swung out over the wharf. A heavy iron hook dangled on a chain from the end of it. A man grabbed the hook, fastened it into one of the bales of rubber on the wharf. Then the iron arm lifted the bale and swung it over the side of the ship. Busy workmen guided it into a deep hole that must lead down to the very bottom of the ship. "How does the arm know when to turn?" Kondima asked Gar. "What makes the hook go up and down?" "Go up forward and see for yourself." Gar leaned her arms on the rail and looked very tired. "A man does it," Kondima told her when she came back. "The man thinks, and the iron arm and the hook do the work." At noon the men began loading water buffalo. Coolies drove a number of them onto the wharf. Kondima saw the men pass a band of heavy canvas under the belly of a water buffalo. The band came up over her back, and the ends made two strong loops. The iron arm swung out and lowered the hook. The man caught it and hooked the loops of the buffalo's belt. The hook began to lift the buffalo cow. The band tightened around the frightened animal. Her feet left the wharf, and she flew through the air. The iron arm swung her, bellowing and kicking, over the deck rail and lowered her down into the deep hole which Uncle called the hold. One by one the iron arm loaded the heavy animals. Not one of them held still. All of them kicked and snorted and struggled and bellowed their anger and fright. "How silly they are," Kondima said to Gar. "They should be glad for a fine flying ride like that." A memory stirred in her mind, and she added, "Of course, I don't suppose they ever saw a ship or a hook before. Maybe we shouldn't blame them." The following day the ship plowed through rough seas again. Neither Kondima nor Gar wanted to leave her berth to see the water buffalo unloaded at Myra. That evening, when the ship sailed from the Myra anchorage, it headed straight west, and by morning the mountains of Borneo had been left behind. Endless waves of troubled water stretched in every direction. 3 days later, when the ship anchored in Singapore harbor, Kondima felt that she had seen a good deal of the world. But one glimpse of the busy streets in that truly great city gave her the same feeling she had had when she first saw the red bus. This time she had no place to run. She clung tightly to Uncle's hand. Dressed in her pretty yellow dress, she wore shoes for the first time in her whole life. A motor car whisked her away to the sunny compound where Uncle and his family lived. They brought Gar, too. On the following morning, Uncle took both girls to the general hospital and made all arrangements for their care. Gar went to the women's ward and Kondima to the children's ward. They did not see each other again.